And there we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World with me, Kane Sims, fresh off the plane from Munich, where we had All About Voice last Friday. And I have to say, it was absolutely fantastic. The 169 Labs team really do know how to put on a show. I'm sure you might be able to rewatch that if you Google All About Voice, because it was spectacular. Today, I'm joined by Sean Austin, who is the co-founder and CEO of Helios, or Helios Life Enterprises, as it's technically known. And we're going to be talking all around speech analytics and being able to analyze people's tone of voice using voice AI, which is incredibly exciting. So, Sean, thank you very much for joining me, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Excited to talk about all things speech analytics.
Nice, nice. Sounds good. Before we do get into that conversation, I want to tell you about the webinar that we are doing with TalkDesk next week on December the 8th. It is all about conversational commerce. And so, if you are looking for ways in which you can utilize conversational AI, going beyond customer support and customer service, which is where a lot of the attention is spent right now, and focusing on instead revenue generation use cases and sales activities, then this webinar next week is going to be for you. It's with Dawn Harpster, who's a senior conversational architect at TalkDesk, and we're going to be getting into just how conversational AI can and is in practice contributing to the bottom line with sales. So do join us next Thursday. If you want to join, you can either go to the VUX World website, vux.world, and click on the events tab, or you can go to vux.la/commerce, and you can find out more and register there. Looking forward to that conversation next week. But Sean, as I said, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Helios.
Absolutely. So I've been a technologist and deep actually in the audio space for really my whole career. This has been a really important piece of my journey here, as well as my co-founders, who is the academic end of this. But what's possible with audio was really illuminated to me when I was at Spotify through their first acquisition ever. I think going on 10 years ago, actually. But that technology, that idea that audio could be so much more. I mean, they've proven it. I was part of the team that worked closely with recommendations. So they blended AI with mass audio, with mass consumers, and we're able to get people the music they want based upon the way they hear music, the way they consume it. So I can always point to that as, being there for with a startup and Spotify nearly 4 years, going to the top of the really world on what programming could be for music. Most influential playlist and most influential channel with that great team there, led by some really smart people that still are in the music industry deeply. That set the stage for this. So Helios, founded in 2017, comes from this idea that we know human beings are the most prominent, well adapted, sophisticated biologically beings that use tone. So I'm using it now. Kane, you're using it when you talk. We actually beat other types of human beings, right? Other subspecies, if you want to call it that, right? With the Denisovans or the Neanderthals, right? Because our branch was better at understanding, better at communicating, potentially even better at tone, right? This idea that we have the most sophisticated tracheal, all these sort, can go down that rabbit hole, but we are most sophisticated. We use it all the time. It's actually helped us evolve. It helped us communicate. It helps us expand. It helps us evolve as a entire species, is at the heart of Helios, right? The center of the world almost, because it's the sun or center of the universe, right? That is what we're focused on. We believe that understanding has dramatic implications for our future. I wouldn't want to be working on anything else. Spotify was a fantastic precursor to what's possible, but they're focused on music and now podcasts and moving on. But we see it as sort of this general layer to computing that needs to be there.
Interesting. 2017. So Helios means what? The center of the universe.
Well, so it's the sun. It's like sun god, right? So we took sort of these Greek, ancient mythologies, right? But this concept was really the belief that transparency or the tone that can illuminate, actually user experience, like the experience of discussing or understanding, is the center. 38% of a message is from tone of voice, and one could say different studies say like 42 or 36, right? All that, but it's a pretty known, not Helios fact, it's a pretty known component of the world that tone is so well established. And if you ask anybody, ask anyone who's been successfully married for quite some decades, I think they'll tell you the tone of voice and understanding that is very key to their success, as well as communicating with your children or communicating with your best friend or your family or your parents or or any loved one, right? That is how we connect. That's how we understand. That's how we actually, get better.
Interesting. You're right. There's a really good scene in Friends. Don't know if you watch Friends or if you've, I'm assuming you've
Oh,
seen
oh
it.
yeah,
Everyone seems to have
I've
seen
seen a
Friends.
few. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's one of them programs that's just always on ambiently in the background, and
that and The
there's a
Office
really
are,
good.
are competing.
Yeah, it's on Netflix now, so it's just in the kitchen. It just seems to be on in the background all the time. And I was telling you how terrible this house is for kind of like soundproofing, so you can hear everything that's going on everywhere in this house. So I'm basically just hearing Friends all day. But there's a really good scene in Friends where Joey is in this play, and it wasn't very good. And at the end of it, he comes to the rest of the kind of crew and stuff, and he says, "How do you think it was?" And they all say, "Oh yeah, yeah, it was okay, it was okay." He said, "Well, there's an agent that wants to speak to me afterwards, so I'll catch up with you in a minute." And Phoebe says, "Based on this play," and he looks at Phoebe like really sort of like shocked that she would have such an opinion. And she went, "Based on this play," like that. And so
Yeah,
like
yeah, that's
exactly
perfect.
the same words were
That's
said.
perfect.
The only thing that was changed was the tone, but it completely changed the meaning.
And that, I mean, that is a great example that I may need to borrow from you in the future, because that is like exactly what we're focused on. We're not the only ones in the world doing it, right? There's a great company, Sunday Health, for instance. I have no affiliation with them, but the great company doing work with like healthcare, so wellness, where the sound of your voice and the tremors in it have very important meaning for early onset Parkinson's detection, right? Because that
Mm.
sort of like breakdown of your tracheal reverberations are known and they're very noticeable if anyone has knows someone with Parkinson's or early onset, and then it progresses, right? So nothing about nothing about what you speak really would detect it, but the voice is totally an amazing diagnostic tool. So there's companies that have deployed it. We're certainly very aware of the space. We've definitely focused on a very unique sector and the only company focused on it, which is scary, but also at the same time, like what you need to do if you're pushing forward is finance. So the world of finance is arguably the most high stakes marketplace in the world. Understanding transparency. I mean, these are like table stakes for anybody, right? All the dollars spent and all the trades happening are for transparency. You have people who, I won't comment on it too much, but like certain people in the media, owning large crypto exchanges may or may not have been transparent. Could you have gotten more from the tone of voice, right? Like it is a piece of every conversation. People now go back and think about it and are looking at the calls and the conversations with certain people. And I just say, like, this has to be everywhere, right? We're thinking it already. Equity analysts have been doing it for decades. They know the tone of voice is important. Your example is great. You can say different things with different tones. You can be excited. You can be depressed. You can know something about a M&A, right? So there's different directions. But if you don't have tone of voice, I mean, you're kind of flying blind.
Interesting. Well, they do say that it's not like what you say; it's how you say it, isn't it? Yeah, so X% is verbal, X% is what body language, X% is tone. So it's really interesting. So there's another company actually that does something similar to what you were describing there. Canary Speech. I don't know if you come across Canary
Yep,
Speech.
familiar.
Yeah,
Yep.
they had the whole kind of Parkinson's diagnosis stuff and dementia diagnosis stuff they've had for a few years now. Um, but yeah, it's amazing what it can do and where this technology is going. So explain a little bit more about that use case then. So you're focusing on the financial industry, and you mentioned their
Yep, the
equity
finance.
analysts and stuff like that. So I wonder if you can give us a sort of a more insight into the kind of use case, like where and how is this being used, sort of thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, for who it's for, right? When you think about, right, like I built a lot of throughout my life too, always thinking personas and, of course, the
Mm.
experiences, understanding like who is this for? It's for people who know transparency is important, right? They're a perfect, going deeper. A perfect example is equity analysts. People who listen to these calls have been doing it for decades. They've been doing it through someone calling in and listening, right? Dialing in through a web link or a webinar as it kind of progressed. Zoom's even progressing it more, as you would imagine, more forward by using Zoom links for their earnings calls. So you can actually get video in these too. So it's a better experience, right? Better UX actually. But the voice part has been listened to. The tone has been listened to. It's just not systematically digested and basically offered through a product stream. So when we talk about like who we have sold to, who continues to see value here, people know. Some people could believe, oh, you don't need technology to do it, right? Like you can do it with just a person. Well, then this isn't for you. We're saying technology enables a better understanding, which you could plug into a machine and have that run, algorithmically. You could look at a dashboard and see a score. Was the call good or bad? Right from the tone of voice, was it very bullish? Was it bearish? Those things we can produce and are producing. And if you fall into that category, which there's a lot, I think, and more who believe transparency is key to market efficiency and fundamentals now, then Helios is right for you.
So what for someone who's not familiar? I'd never heard of this equity analyst before. What is it that an equity analyst does? You
Yeah.
mentioned
So,
also earnings calls.
yep,
How
that's a
do
great
those
point.
two kind of come together?
Yeah, I just gotta zoom in too quick at times. So any company that's public can be traded, right? If it's public, it's on an exchange, it can be traded. Understanding those companies is partially what an equity analyst does. An equity being a company, an analyst being someone who understands them, right? So there are a lot of different ways to understand a company. One day when Helios is public, there'll be Helios running on my voice too, which will be very, very meta. But there's people who will look at, what was the revenue quarter over quarter? How many shipments did Tesla do, right? What's the ESG rating? So all this information to get your mosaic to understand. An equity analyst is someone who thinks about those equities or those companies, right? And an earnings call is actually globally more used in the U.S., but an earnings call is a usually quarterly event where the leadership, CEO, CFO, COO, right, have an opportunity to talk about the company. They release some standard projections, or sorry, I'm sorry, standard statements, financial statements, as well as have a Q&A session. So when you think about like this actually interview, this conversation, Kane, when you ask me something, if you ask me like, where exactly will you be in 2 years and 6 months or something like that, like I
Hmm.
wouldn't really know. It'd be, it's a question that, reasonable, and I probably fumble, I come up with some answer or something like that. But those sort of ideas and concepts are what people have known, equity analysts have known for decades, is a harder question, and a response from a CEO that gives you that fumbling means something, right? It doesn't mean they're lying, it doesn't mean something, but it potentially means they're not equipped to answer the question, which is potentially a way for them to position their dollars in the company, more or less, right? So put more dollars in, change their portfolio, and then you can go and talk about all the more sophisticated algorithmic funds who do the sort of same thing, but they don't have people in the mix. They try to, algorithmically do everything. But for me,
Hmm.
it's all around, like to your question, all around, does someone analyze these calls? Do people believe transparency is key in it? Do they think about the speakers? And there's a ton of traders, ton of investment asset managers in the world who want to understand their equities better.
Interesting. So how for those that are interested in transparency, how does the transparency element play into this? Is the assumption that the leaders that have these earnings calls aren't being transparent?
So I'll give you a slightly longer answer. So we pull out unique characteristics of the voice, one being like loudness. So loudness has a lot of non-Helios scientific research around relationship to like belief, or the inverse of belief, like lack of understanding. It's not a
Hmm.
perfect, if all of a sudden Sean starts yelling to Kane, that doesn't mean I know more. It also doesn't mean I'm definitely angry. But there are, of course, relationships, and your ears are doing it right now. My ears are doing it, right? So we have the machine taught on a lot of things, but if you try to like pare it down, there's certain characteristics that have relationship to performance, right? So if you get asked a question and you're typically louder than normal, we can say, and we can prove all these things, that there's a relationship towards, say, stock movement negatively, right? Or stock returns, or potentially if my voice tremors, which is now slightly different characteristic, that I'm not saying something. And actually, we've shown that M&A, like a merger and acquisition, can be statistically shown if I'm sounding a certain way. And we believe that's
Hmm.
because it's such a large event. Slack gets bought by what, Salesforce for 16 billion or whatever, then 23 billion, I forget, many billions. That's a big purchase. If I'm Benioff buying it, their CEO, Mark Benioff, we've shown that you can detect these little variations, right? Like he's getting asked questions about all different things, not even about buying anything because he can't release it, but he's known for months he's about to buy
Hmm.
but the company's about to buy something vastly expensive. It needs to go well, right? These are big decisions, and we can show that you can actually detect these little changes. So It's back to like you could think about like the healthcare situation where if you can detect these differences in voice from the tone, it means something, right? In that case, a health right screener. We think about it right now for finance, like does it mean it's more volatile? Does it mean the stock's going to move in a positive or negative direction? Generally, does it mean the text is positive and the tone is negative? Does that mean there's some sort of discrepancy that exists? So all of these
Mm.
are, I mean, we're bleeding edge driving the research while building the product. So it's, piece of my 15-second plug would be researchers in this space, not just customers, like researchers at universities or people interested. There's a place for them to be like bleeding edge researchers, kind of like Elon wants to always have AI researchers on his team and plugs that. I would say like our voice stuff is so new. There's probably so many new things, right? We just got on Nasdaq.com for volatility today. That's just the scratching the surface still for what's possible with voice tone.
Mm. So so with the Salesforce example, what did you do? You've trained a model to pick up on when someone is stuttering or tremoring or whatever it might be, and then you've used presumably previous examples of sales calls where people have been asked merger and acquisition based questions, including the
Well,
Salesforce example,
even
and
actually
then you're
kind of
able to then.
a little bit even crazier. Sorry to cut you off there at the end. Is they don't even need to be asked questions about a merger and acquisition. It just weighs on them slightly that it's such a large magnitude event that it actually can be detectable in their voice. So, I mean, what you said is right. I mean,
Oh,
in
right.
so many words, right? Like we know when these events happened in the past, right? We can pull a list. We have all of our voice measurements and our basically massive machines running these things, and we can basically do what you said, which is can you bake a model, and then what's the performance, how you could trade it, or all kind of details. But that is exactly the process, right? In so many words. So then you can say, well, can the voice tone detect these tremors? Can we call them certain things? Sure, but in the end of the day, it's trying to forecast an M&A or it's trying to forecast um, volatility, right, in the marketplace, which is the Nasdaq.com piece. Can we actually show earlier movements to volatility than the rest of the market knows? Because our belief around this transparency is if there's 300 CEOs talking on one day, 300 hours of talking, mostly CEOs will talk on these. They know a lot, right? There's
Mm.
billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars invested in market cap in these companies. If you could basically make this gauge, right? If you could make this value around it, listen to not an exaggeration, a million hours of these talks, right? The sophisticated bionic ear. Could you see the
Mm.
volatility? And we actually have shown Nasdaq, through one of our relationships, we've promoted it, and it's groundbreaking. Honestly, like from MP3 files, you can know market volatility from the voices and their tone. You can see the markets change like 60 days in the future. It's sort of
Hmm.
I don't know. It's totally sci-fi to me, but it's grounded in a ton of statistics and work and product that we've done for the last 5 years.
So you can tell. So what do? You take every earnings call that happens, you ingest it, and you then scan it for a bunch of different parameters. Like, does this is that what it, is that broadly speaking how it works?
Yeah.
You kind of collect these earnings calls, analyze them, excuse me, and then you've got markers which is like, okay, merger acquisition radar is spiking here, or market volatility radar is spiking in this cluster of calls. Like, is that broadly speaking how it goes?
Yep, we're gonna get you on the trade desk soon because it is roughly speaking how we do it, right? So it's a matter of we have to ingest constant amounts of audio, like as much as we can get, we ingest. So we're ingesting conference calls, earnings calls, the most important, investor days, special presentations, all of it through a fact set relationship. And now we're actually looking at other partnerships where we can use their audio. So a company called Era, for instance, has even more events. We have a relationship with them to analyze it, but essentially, like you said, it's plug into the audio. We've now listened to millions of hours, right? Trained a model on a million hours. So we have this sort of next generation ear, much better than an equity analyst, actually I should say this, could never listen to that much. It's kind of one of the main theses here, right? Like you couldn't sit
Mm.
down for a million hours. I think it's, I forget how many hundreds of years it is or something, but it's too much, right? So we now have the power of the machine and scale that has no, biological constraints. And all of a sudden we hear all the frequencies, we build these models, and like you said, we're pulling out these, call it radar, call it signals that can be used. So we don't trade. I mean, that's not our business, right? We want the audio ingestion and intelligence AI. But if you could trade, which a lot of people can, something like market volatility, right? If you knew the market's going to change or had a better signal about the future, they can use that, right? It's a better understanding, back to transparency. It's better understanding and knowledge from tone of voice because you're listening more deeply to the people who are, I mean, honestly, in charge of quite a bit of, important companies, right? Like every public company, they're in charge of.
Mm, interesting. So you don't trade. Why don't you trade then? It seems as though you could be, you could keep this to yourself and just run away to the races.
So we're looking at forming some relationships. There's different. So I mean, the short answer is you need a lot of funds, right? Because it's not gonna 10,000x, right? So if I put $100 in, right, $1,000, right? So you'll make a delta, and we're very sure, and we've shown that, and our customers are doing that. But you of course need like dollars under management. So for us to even get a $10 million fund, which is for us an undertaking because we haven't run those funds
Mm,
historically ever, right? Is it's much more work than us being technologists, audio engineers, basically people who've done this. That's not to say we couldn't partner with a fund to get them access, which we're talking about right now, or make a product where a fund could put in dollars like an ETF. So it's a product where you
mm,
can invest dollars. You don't need to buy the signal directly. You're sort of, it's a more, mass market way of investing. So
mm,
we're now exploring those. I mean, it's like you kind of pinpointing. Like we want to capture for Helios value. We certainly have a mission to get this out the door and usable. So that's been priority. But there's definitely ways for us to be more scaled, more commercially, I think, scaled, to be honest.
mm. Um, how did you get to the point where you can say with confidence that I don't know this CEO through his tone of voice there's we have a certain suspicion that there is a merger coming up, for example. Like, how do you get to that point? Because you'll need data presumably to train your models to be able to detect this kind of stuff. So presumably then you would need to what find a bunch of earnings calls dated from X year and then companies where something had transpired and then you're trying to pick up signals in that historic data. Like, how do you go about training a model to pick up on merger acquisitions, market volatility and stuff like that? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
how do you
Well,
do it?
again, actually, you're generally in the right direction of how you would do it. So a big piece is called. So the more you have, right, the more you can actually train. Though it takes longer and you use bigger machines, but if you have more data points, you're going to be more confident on your results, right? So as a call it like a general law of data science and ML. So that's spot on, right? So we have quite a lot of data now. 3 years ago, smaller data set, less confidence in our customers, but now it's all US equities, all calls back 20 years. Like I mentioned, you're a million hours trained, but actually more we've listened to and trained, kind of like older generation models. So we have, massive data set, basically satisfies the most hardcore, we need a lot of data person. The other part of it, I mean, is statistical analysis, right? So you build these models, right, and you actually want to understand their sort of probability ranges. So without getting into too much detail, it's like sort of general statistics, financial back testing. Uh, you actually said it, but just in a lot, more jargon way. A lot of these systems and frameworks on how to test data exist, right? So that is a never-ending method because you actually could test it in a million ways. Could I change my portfolio drawdown by 6% versus 8%? How does it perform? So it's a totally never-ending function, but we've done so much in it now. We've had third parties validate it. We've released some of our research through our website. We've released it through partners. The NASDAQ piece is actually a continued effort in that. But once you have, I would say we sort of knew early this year with our new product. So when we had more data, enough validation in our minds, a lot of it internal, but still some external, you sort of look at it and are like, this is working for a lot of these cases, right? It should work. It's definitely no one's doing it, so it's not easy, but it certainly is showing results that mean something. We've checked and checked again if we've made mistakes, Now we're seeing it with a third party, right? So that is general parameters or general data testing methods. But we see it. So we see it. We release the results, and we're constantly looking for more. Um, yeah, and realize like it's pretty wild stuff. It's pretty wild that it exists.
But you must have had to start from a point of view. You must have had to start with, we know as a human that this tone means that. Did you? Did you have to do something to try and figure out as a very first premise before you build any models to do anything? You must have had to start presumably with some degree of theory or
Yeah.
research around this is what tone of voice means, and this is how tone of voice is used in these earnings calls, and we believe that our hypothesis is that when a tone of voice goes like this, then that is the case. Did you start out with that kind of, you know,
Yeah.
practical
100,
research into tone of voice?
it's 100% again. So you keep hitting them on the mark. So I mean, even top of the chain is what I mentioned on transparency. Is even knowing tone of voice should relate, I think, is a massive jump actually for people to invest into it because they would say, well, there's no academic research on this. There's two papers that have existed for the forever, actually, for all perpetuity. I think there's two, maybe three now, and they're in the last, one's like 3 years old, one's 10 years old. But there's basically even no academics doing this, which is sort of even makes it a little even more risky, right? Like usually academics lead everything, right? Lead the research because that's what they do. So that leap, even that transparent, understanding comes from it, is what you're saying, right? There's a hypothesis there. There's a call it a neuroscience meets social psychology meets technology bet, which we believed in. That's what my co-founder and I's background truly matched, and we said, I've known for 15 years. We knew we could do it. Then you do what you said, which is now you got to start making hypotheses and research, and no one's doing this either on your own around is it loudness? What does loudness mean? Is loudness the change over like a 20 millisecond spectral band of 1 to 2, right? So without worrying about any of that stuff, I mean, it is exactly like you said. You have to start to understand the neuroscience, the bleeding edge of like emotion detection, the understanding of what financial markets mean, even the slightly to my own horn, the idea that Nasdaq.com is showing this volatility movement that really has robust analysis and it comes from MP3 files, but it shows precursor relationships to major market movements. Like it detects COVID. You can see from people's voices, the volatility spikes from their voices. I mean, that to me is like the one of the most unbelievable things that we've done. I mean, out it could argue out there right now, but the most unbelievable thing we've done is that you take MP3 files, right, sound files, no transcripts, no text, anything, and we can show from our models from this rigorous, corpus, you can see the same event. So it actually comes before COVID, which means people's voices start to sound extremely volatile before this event happens. I mean, it is like you'd expect almost. People probably knew some stuff. People were more exposed to supply chains out in China. It starts to leak out, right? Like it's not because people were hiding things. It's probably because they started to see it and it manifests, and you see it. You can see it in our chart when you overlay it with the stock price, market stock prices, right? It's sort of like mind blowing, to be honest.
Mm. So Nasdaq is using your solution on its website. Is that what you're
So,
saying?
so they're through a partner, like a third party research options firm. There's a write up on Nasdaq.com because what we've done is show the predictive capabilities for the Nasdaq Volatility Index. So it's called the
Right.
VolQ, right? So it's a product for them. So they're not using it, but they have a product a lot of people are using, which is VolQ, right? Kind of like a VIX competitor, and shows market volatility in a certain way. Certainly has nothing to do with voice, but what we've now shown is this relationship between the two, where their product is doing something. Nasdaq makes some pretty wild data products, and they have all this information. We don't play in that space, but now we have a different signal that you can basically pair them, and you can say, well, if the voice is kind of like out of congruence with this VolQ, it actually means you can do something, which is never before done with voice tone. It's a 100% brand new.
Mm. So you need to understand tone, obviously, to do this. And if you mentioned there you're not using text, so you're not using anything speech to text or anything like that. It sounds like you're doing the analysis purely on the audio, which
Yep.
means there must be something to do with some frequency analyzer or something where it's all around the frequencies that the voice has within it, and I don't know exactly what a kind of, you mentioned loudness.
Hmm.
There's probably the tone of voice. A voice is just a series of frequencies, and so if someone's got a different tone of voice, there's difference in the frequency of the voice that voice is producing. But what I don't get is how you can deduce that a voice has a certain tone, because without hearing that speaker before, how do you know that that's not just the tone that that speaker has? If that
Yeah.
makes
So
sense.
yeah, it does make sense. So it's actually a very similar question to what customers or prospects would ask us, right? Because there is so much nuance in this that it's exciting to talk about, but easy for me, I think, to make it confusing at times, or for one to get in a rabbit hole. So to kind of like wrap the thinking, we're essentially building like a bionic ear, right? So we have access to all the frequencies coming in, all the signals, all the as robust as the MP3 file is, and actually half jokingly, the microphone, right? So the microphone we
Mm,
were just talking about to start this. If I'm on my AirPods, there's actually less information coming, less tone. The words are still going, but versus your cool mic and my cool mic, that's actually not now jokingly at all. One of the reasons I got this setup is I want to make sure my tone of voice comes across versus like a compressed, you know,
mm,
sounds like I'm an ant or something like that, which I'm
yeah, yeah.
losing tone. So we have all these frequencies coming in from our FactSet, integration, right? And what we've done is we can measure whatever we want, right? But you could think about making an ear that only hears like loudness, like how useful would that be? Or the fact that ours can hear anything, and we know what we're trying to pick up because we know past performance, right? So this whole giant research slash commercialization and really pioneering work can align. Like the trick is knowing where to pinpoint it, right? Because it basically is a totally open ocean. Like here's the ocean,
Mm,
Kane. There's a huge, pond of tuna, right? Whole like pod of them, but it's in the ocean. Like go find it. So like the whole map of understanding it are basically algorithms and what that means for finance. And there's certainly still more to come. But that has been our endeavor, which is to your question earlier, huge component research, huge component like non coding, also a huge component big data compression and analytics and scaled giant what are they called, like N2 monster machines for Google in the cloud, like these big data analysis is a huge other piece, and then actually selling it and understanding why it can be applicable as a part. But I mean we know, I mean I'm trying to summarize it, we know some parts of the past, right? We have the capability that is very unique to actually analyze all of these things, and then there's a process to test them constantly. So we know what's important, we know what we're trying to find, and now we have 5 years of proprietary understanding in the space that no one else has.
mm. That's definitely one of the things that I think it's, especially with AI services. The longer you can do it and get better at it, the much harder it becomes for anyone to catch up, because you're not. It's not like I don't know, like an Uber, where it's hard enough to get a network of drivers, obviously, but you've got a chance because you don't really need a long runway sort of thing to get there. Whereas with AI, it gets better over time as you ingest more data and improve your models, and so you can't really go from a standing cold start to having something that's comparable, because you need that time in order to get there, sort of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that even if there was another company that was trying to do this kind of thing, they would have a very hard task, because it's all to do with timing, isn't it? The longer you can do it, the better you get. The harder it is for others to sort of catch up.
I mean, even with decreased costs of computing, right, that are happening, of course, all the time, which really enabled us. So there is certainly cheaper machines and things like this, and it can run faster and whatnot. You're talking millions of dollars in processing, actually, unless someone came along and
Mm,
said, "Here's the blueprint, here's the IP, like you can shortcut things." You'd have to procure, like we have, all the audio, right? That's not cheap. You have to then process it, which audio processing is very complex and very compute heavy, right? And that's before you even know what you're trying to look for. So you make one wrong move and you're computing stuff you don't really need, and then you learn, and then you keep. So like you
mm,
said, there's a massive moat that we've built. We're going to be actually looking at global equity coverage. We are looking, and actually we'll be doing that next year. So talk about another 20x on our data set, basically, and we're talking about now even more data. It is
Mm,
definitely one of the reasons we're so bullish on the company and why we're, want to be on as many places that we can talk about, and also investing more, bringing more people on in the right way, not over hiring like a lot of people did. But we are,
mm,
yeah, very excited for what it could be in the future, and doing a plug for all the way back to VUX World, the interfaces of the future around voice, right? Which I'm preaching to the choir. You can see that interface in finance, right? Like it is existing. It is totally critical for understanding, and billions of dollars trade on them. So like this
mm,
hyper important interface, and 38% of the messages are gone. They don't, not like I mentioned, not all of them do video. So now you have text and tone, and nobody's doing tone, so you have text. I
mm.
can't imagine what the world would be like if we only texted each other. If you can't
Yeah.
even do emojis, just text.
No.
Like you said, how would you know if
And
you're being sarcastic? How would you know if you're being
yeah,
angry, right? You lose it all.
yeah. Does that full stop mean that they're angry? Like, what's going on?
Well, and
Yeah.
it's a real thing. I mean, or you deploy people to listen to them, and now you have a one person's bias doing everything. I mean, it's exactly what I saw at Spotify, which is why it's so, without there any overlap in exactly what we did, the concepts are so applicable, right? Like, how do you recommend
Mm,
music? I listened to 55,000 minutes of music one year. Like, I think it was
wow.
actually the most in the company, but it was like 36 days of living of music because I just always have it on. So I got pretty good at knowing what music was, but it still got paired with a machine. Like there were still massive advantages of pairing it.
Mm,
24 or 5 hardcore, but it's like we know that's the future. So an equity analyst could be paired with 8% of a message, right? It's huge loss.
mm. I lost you for a split second just at the back end of that there, but I got the gist, and hopefully the recording when it comes out is includes it. But so is that the buyer then, an equity analyst? Is that who is ultimately going to hand over the dollars to Helios?
So there's a team. I mean, it's actually funny. They probably don't think about it like a user experience or a UX or anything, right? But so there's a team around a equity analyst, so or as part of it. But there's like portfolio managers, equity analysts, right? Research teams. They have software as part of it. Some don't, right? But think of it like a group that are making these decisions in one way or another. We sell into those teams because we're saying, they're saying that pitch is like, do you believe that you need to have intelligence in these companies? Do you believe in this transparency bit? Are you actually already investing in text technologies to understand people for whatever particular, way you trade? That that's who we sell to, right? So then we say like, well, just like what I'm saying now and telling you is why would you not want that 38%? Just because it's new. But I mean, I'm telling people a fact that I haven't made up. It helped drive the company, but it is clearly a massive lane. Use your example of like people saying two sentences two different ways. I don't think there's a lot of sarcasm on earnings calls, probably, but there are clearly tone changes. And
Mm,
and if you don't have them, then you don't have them. You probably are making worse decisions without them.
mm. And it sounds as though, from what you've explained there, millions of hours worth of audio ingested, lots of computing power required to analyze those, lots of kind of like experiments presumably that have been ran and then tested on this audio and then iterated and tested again. So you've had, and then you've had to license the calls in the first place. So it sounds as though you've had to kind of like, do a lot of work, but also none of that stuff is free. So how did you actually do that then? Were you funded? Was it kind of just like, you would do something and get a customer, the customer would fund things? Like, how have you managed to get to where you are from zero?
Yeah, it's been a lot of work, a lot of hours, and for my co-founder and I and the team. But I mean, some of the tangibles are, yeah, we've raised over $1 million in seed funding from some, well, actually a bunch of individuals. We did a crowdfunding campaign in the summer, so we had 212 extra individuals actually as part of our overall cap table. So that was, I think,
Nice.
to me, probably one of the, I mean, it's 166 of the 1.1 million basically, but it's a exciting thing when you see it start to like make sense to a lot more people. We have a
Mm,
bunch of sort of traditional angels like entrepreneurs and others, and MBA all stars on our cap table. A bunch of individuals who own technology companies. $50,000-$100,000 checks, so they certainly are good validation too. But that scaled crowdfunding was very interesting. $100 from people who see it, and I mean all over the world. They were seeing it, and they're like, well, they don't invest $10,000 or 100,000, but they saw it and they believed in it, and we didn't even know all of them, which is kind of, to me, actually very wild. So very exciting. So that's one piece. I mean, we have customers on board. This is not, or our enterprise product is, more premium of an offering. So that certainly is designed because of the cost, like you mentioned, right? We have some
Mm.
costs. We certainly want to build a profitable and essentially our break even actually company, but built the data intelligence into an offering, premium offering. We also in September launched a much more entry offering, so it's sort of a dashboard access, right? So it's actually traditional SaaS now, not data integrations or
Mm.
anything complicated. Very simple, very easy. Was the call good? Was the call bad? You can get more complicated, but that's the heart of it. So that's available as well. So those start to power, right? The revenue itself can power the organization, and then we have a dedicated team, right? We have around 10 individuals. 2 years ago, I want to say it was a handful of individuals when we really like started to hit some sales. This year, we're near 10 data analysts supporting us, an intern, for instance, supporting us, who's fantastic. We have sales, coming on. We have actually some very prominent advisors supporting us in a non full time role, and that's shaped a very, I think, progressive, innovative company.
Mm. I think it's always good to see that sort of crowdfunding thing happening because it means that you've got a good product and people are willing to put the money where the mouth is. I think sometimes it can be quite challenging um, for some companies that think they have a good idea, and obviously, the whole kind of idea and every startup that you'll see should be doing the things that you've kind of outlined, which is finding those assumptions, researching them, building something that you think can prove out your kind of hypothesis, and then iterating your way there. But it takes a while sometimes for some companies to find that product market fit, whereas it seems as though right from the off you've kind of were onto something, and people are obviously willing to put the money where the mouth is to get there, which is great. Um, of those customers and those teams that are kind of using the product, you mentioned there that one of the I can't remember exactly which question I asked you now, but you said it was a question that customers ask you. What are some of the other questions, like some of the sort of like, I don't know, curveball questions, or some of the sort of like even just the common questions that a customer will have for you when you get on a call with them? You're telling them about the importance of tone. You're telling them that they've missed out on 38% of all of the data that they've been trying to analyze so far. What are some of the questions that you get in those calls?
I mean, at that point, I just calmly slide a contract across the virtual desk, and then everyone starts signing.
And everyone goes
But
home laughing,
they're like,
goes
well,
home
they're
happy.
like, I can't not have it. But so I would say, and actually it's great because I think 9 out of the 10 questions, I don't know exactly how many, but say all of them, but maybe one have been what we do get asked. I mean, this is such a new space that we don't, we have no need to overcomplicate it. We certainly could get ultra confusing probably across the board. I mean, our product can allow a researcher to find things we don't know. I mean, that is like very, very possible if they dedicate the time. But we have had to
Mm,
distill it to a lot of the things you're asking. I mean, you think about technology, you're in voice, so you're asking very close to all the same questions of, help me understand it a little, give me an example of it. Crazy enough, like we use tone all the time, but like the connection is so new still. The Parkinson's one is closer. That's why I always use it because like
mm,
people are familiar with a tremor, but what does a sound like? That means I'm gonna acquire a company. It's like too abstract for most people. If you ask an
mm,
equity analyst, though, actually, they say like they can't describe it, but they're like, oh, I know that sound when they're not quite, or when they're really excited about something. Like they have actually the sounds kind of known in their head, or like I
mm,
did at Spotify. The other one I would say too, which is a little more, maybe a little more concrete, is transparency of the company is a question that we get, which is also a reason we did the funding because we had to file our Form C, which has, I mean, they're self-accredited financials, but they're financials that are out there. Like our
mm,
Form C is what, 45 pages with the SEC. We'll be doing actually general solicitation for investors through our website. Like we have overly, because we buy into this. That's like who we are. We're overly committed to the transparency part. Like we're not trying to be crypto companies zapping money out of people's wallets and freezing exchanges or all the other people who've done not great things. Honestly, like we believe in it, right? We believe in transparency. We're not a public company, so analyzing my voice tone won't shift markets probably. yet. But what we've done is really stand behind it. So that is a question that comes up. Like you asked it too, but just more deep questions on the organization, like how many customers, how what's another good one? Like backgrounds on us, for instance, like our
Mm,
chief revenue officer, what was he selling previous to this, just to help understand it. My background means a lot, right? So the idea of transparency, being open about it, putting it out there. I think
mm,
it's all in the thread of the voice tone, right? We actually try to get my voice out there more, which is why this is so important because we want
mm.
people to hear what I'm saying, reach out, ask me a question. I mean, I probably can't answer everyone, but at least hear what we're saying, not trying to be, at all black boxed. And that
Mm.
comes up actually quite a bit about the organization, and we're, all for it.
Yeah, that's good. What is there a difference? There'll be a lot of people listening to this that work in voice AI, familiar with voice AI technologies.
Yep.
A lot of contact centers and things like that have been using things like sentiment analysis and uh, voice biometrics for a while, and a lot of that kind of analyzes tone and stuff like that. So, is there any distinct differences between what you're talking about and, say, sentiment analysis that listens to an audio and determines whether someone's happy or sad, for example, or
So,
biometrics that profiles somebody's voice print and matches that against what they have on file to authenticate that someone is who they say they are?
yep. Yeah, yeah, great question. So I think they are very close, right? What I've seen from doing as much as I can, because I'm still focused on finance, right? Is that an idea of uh, like Google has the NLP piece for just text, right? Doing transcripts, or
Mm,
DeepGram, who we have a relationship with, does transcripts, and everyone's got slight swizzle of languages or whatever. What we haven't seen is a generalized tone component, because I think a couple things. It's more nuanced. It's more nuanced, which means the academics are lagging behind it, which means it's actually not as progressed as tone or text. I'm sorry. So tone is bleeding edge, but it certainly is being looked at now. But I have not seen a general one. There's certainly like examples of some, like you said, maybe it's happy or sad classification, kind of like general valence. You need more than that to connect it to meaning. Because like an example is words immediately have meaning because we've classified what a dictionary is. There is no tone dictionary. So without a tone
mm,
dictionary, how do you take a happy or sad? What does it mean if I'm happy or sad on this call? I mean, look, I'm definitely happy. What does it mean? It means I'm excited about the future. It means I think, uh, well, I would love to stay in touch and talk about certain things, but like, how does that impact future events, which means you can do something with it? There is no tone
mm,
dictionary, right? So Parkinson's, again, using that example, that's closest to a dictionary because it's a medical dictionary, right? So now you can go about it and do that. So, and also they're not using a general tone analyzer. They built their own, they built their own internal systems for it. So I think it's going that way. Like the GPT-3 stuff. That is not. I mean, that's a piece of voice, right? Like GPT-3 with all these abilities to understand, like, and communicate basically, and eventually speech analytics and transcriptions and things like that, which will be hyper accurate across languages and kind of already are. That's the direction we're trying to push. So I mean, I think there'll be a ton of innovation in it towards that tone dictionary. I think some give you that out of the bat. There's certainly no financial one really, and then there's
mm,
certainly even less around interactions like this. Like what would it mean if I saw a little gauge that said happy or sad? Like it would be something around like us understanding one another better, or like the ability to have a more clear relationship in the future, or I don't know, misunderstanding would be minimized. But those are all
mm,
now bleeding edge research questions, right? Someone would, and I would, you know, perfect opportunity on anyone listening to this is there is a huge open domain for it. Guaranteed it's worth
mm,
a fortune and everything too for anyone thinking about the economics, because like sales, right? Sales conversions. You mentioned customer service. What if you knew the text sentiment versus how the tone sounded? What does that mean? Marketing, right? What is marketing when you can understand a commercial? Talk to any sound engineer or any producer. They're going to tell you sound is everything. Anyone in Spotify
mm,
with music will tell you you want to mix the music perfectly. The sound is everything. So it's everywhere.
mm. People do have very, even if they don't realize it, they have very sensitive ears. You know when something sounds bad. You know when something's not good. You know when something's kind of like needs your attention. So the ears, I think, and sound, I do definitely concur. They're really important. Where you kind of alluded to some other examples there of where this stuff might be used. Where else do you think that this could be used? I think you highlighted a real crucial part there, which is that there's no tone dictionary that translates tone into meaning. I think the meaning part is the real crux of it, isn't it? Like in your examples, the meaning is this company is going to acquire another or be acquired, or the CEO sounds unconfident or uncomfortable, which means that the company is in danger, which means that we should think about selling stock or whatever it might be. So I can understand how that in this domain, tone equals meaning. What other examples do you think where this could go in future? Other use cases where you have a hypothesis that tone means something that you think this might be able to kind of extend in, or you're not really thinking in those terms, you're just focusing solely squarely on nailing this
Yeah,
industry and
yeah,
this use case.
yeah. So hopefully my tone of voice gets this one across too, because we get that all the time. So depending on the conversation, I get that all the time on investors. Like we've talked to a bunch of VCs. We're not trying to do that right now, but we're obviously having conversations. We've had it with partners and companies. It comes up a lot with what else could this do? Like what is that?
Mm,
What? How do you get to 100 million? Then how do you get to a billion? People always
mm,
frame it like that. So it's funny because we are laser focused on making this happen because it's enough work for us, and we need to see it fully materialize. Like to
mm,
honestly feel good about ourselves, I think that we've done it. So we're not trying to jump around, but we've thought about it a lot because we do want to set ourselves up for the future. Like we don't want to say, oh, it's worked in finance. Every hedge fund in the world uses it, and now we're done. Like
mm,
I don't think that's in our DNA. So I mean, very concretely, like marketing is a thread that we've explored pretty deeply. Still top of the funnel, but pretty deeply compared to anything
mm.
else. One of our advisors is a great guy, Donald Buckley, former
Oh
chief
yeah,
marketing
I
officer
know
at
Donald.
Showtime. Do you? Great.
Yeah, yeah, I
So
know
he
Donald. Yeah,
is
yeah,
a
yeah.
super smart guy. Love it because he comes at it from the marketing angle, right? So not I wouldn't say by coincidence that it made sense to him, made sense to us, me, and has given us a lot of good thinking. Just not ready to like quite act on it, right? We're kind of planning, but marketing. I mean, use an example of like a pre-run on a commercial, right? Or even a finance commercial, actually. But any commercial that could run, you could score it, right? So they do consumer surveys right now, like Gen Z or whatever. They'll send out notifications in an app. They'll get you to respond to a commercial for 60 seconds. And all of a sudden, now you have the same exact problem around tone. Like, are they being
Mm,
sarcastic when they answer it? Are how do you actually digest that information, right? Not even the commercial itself, like the people's reaction to the commercials where you get your information has now the exact same UX problem as what we've identified. So not only do we have this, to your question, this robust engine to produce and test data, and we think about it like that. So I mean, that by itself is a lot, a lot of IP and a lot of
mm,
long nights. But we know that marketing has firms around market research and analytics to help understand the consumers better. So it's,
mm-hmm.
I look at it and I don't know, it's not hindsight, it's a foresight, I guess. But I look at it and I could think it looks so much like Spotify when I was there. It looks so much now like what we're doing and now we're designing for it, that enriching those understandings, right? Adding transparency to the surveys, understanding the commercials themselves with the sounds and the tones, right? It doesn't have to be the music. Like we really don't touch music. It's a different acoustic piece and by itself very valuable, but different. That for us is coming. We certainly won't defocus ourselves. But when I think
Mm,
about like next major vertical for Helios that we could apply our stuff in, it would be let's go talk to some of the CFOs of some of the larger entertainment companies and talk about optimization of their marketing funnel because we've optimized portfolios for $100 billion hedge funds. I think they'll take the call, and I think someone will buy it.
definitely, that's a head turner. Um, so as you start getting into these sort of use cases, I suppose in this particular example that you're focusing on right now, it's public information, it's public calls that are shared with the public, and you're analyzing data that is essentially freely available data. Not necessarily freely available, you might have to buy it
Yeah,
or license it or
still
whatever, but
public. Correct. Yeah.
it's public information, isn't it? Yeah. And
Yep.
so I don't see there being anyone can do anything they want with that data kind of thing. When it comes to these other examples, like analyzing people's response to an advert, or let's say for example, a contact center could use it to be able to recognize the tone of someone. that has a pattern that correlates to cancelling. So
Yeah.
this person
Yeah.
speaking like this is going to cancel on this call. Or this person right now is really super motivated to buy, close the sale. And so you can
Yep.
have AI assistants either working with agents, listening to the call and helping them with things like that. Like this person is now ready to buy, but offer the sale or whatever. Or you can have AI systems, conversational AI systems that take that data that can then manipulate conversations accordingly. So as you start getting into those use cases, you're not then necessarily using publicly available data. You're using fresh data in every interaction and
Yep.
potentially using data that the user doesn't understand what's happening to it. It doesn't might not necessarily understand like that this activity is even happening. Remember what happened with Amazon Alexa when it got found out that they were sending recordings to for the Philippines or whatever, and a bunch of third-party
Mhm.
contractors were listening to recordings, and everyone went crazy. But Apple turns out they were doing the exact same thing. So there is potentially in as you move into different use cases going to be a kind of ethical and, to use your kind of language, transparency kind of bridge to cross sort of thing. I don't know if you've had any thoughts about how that might be kind of approached.
Yeah, well, a couple things come out. One is this call is being recorded for quality assurance purposes, so
Mm.
please make note. But certainly like we like we couldn't do business in a partnership where we're not comfortable in that transparency as well. So I mean certainly should mean something, but of course that is me saying something versus like fully auditable something. So it's one
Mm.
piece of the puzzle, but I mean that does drive us, right? Like we would want, of course, those um, clear like privacy statements to be said that would be available for someone on the other end. Like we're definitely always. I mean that's why I say it. That's why we're definitely doing. So that's one piece of the puzzle. I mean certainly it's a part of an interaction, right? Is becoming more familiar that Helios doesn't drive is privacy as a tenet of voice communications, VoIP communications. I mean, I think everyone probably would know for now from just hearing me like where I would stand on that. Like it should be known, it's probably baked in terms and conditions for some software, right? So now they're covered legally, and now there's a whole question: is that transparent enough or not? So I mean, I'm
Mm.
very much for it. I think there's also a big piece where like it is to enhance an experience because I mean, how many times have you called? I mean, those what are they? I forget what they're called. The like automatic prompts. I'm just gonna try to remember the right word,
Oh
but
yeah,
like
the
when you
IVR, the IVR sort
IVR,
of
yeah,
systems.
right,
Yeah, yeah,
IVRs
yeah, yeah,
exactly. When
yeah,
you call IVRs and you get upset and you have to hit the zero over and over again, right? Like,
yeah.
why is it not listening to me be upset and only needs to use loudness? Like, it would be the world's simplest, probably $1 billion idea that someone would probably go do after they think about it. But it just has to have like an ambient, basically like a Hey Siri thing in the background listening. And then all of a sudden, like a very simple characteristic of being angry would matter in that situation, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
They aren't doing that. You hit zero and you still get punted out. So I think we're certainly doing it to improve scenarios. I mean, there's I think like any technology, ways you like hidden non-transparent. I don't know. You'd not want to know that you're ready to buy or something, right? Like is a little too forward or something like that. But I think
Mm.
with tone, there's a likelihood that it's easier to always be more like understood, right? Like we're using it to be understood to begin with. Why
Mm.
would we want the machine to discount it? Like if we could understand it, it seems like in most situations it's going to be positive. But yeah, I mean, I like to know when I'm being recorded. It's laws in California. It's laws for biometrics in Illinois. GDPR added some certain pieces around biometrics in Europe, which is why actually we haven't started collecting European or selling European audio, right, and
Mm.
doing that yet. It's there's
But
lots of parts of it, but I'm definitely an advocate for the transparency piece, like understanding when voice is going to be used, and if you tell me it's better and I don't have to hit zero, I would think a lot of people would like that, right? Like I wanted
Mm.
to know, not just like punt me to the other IVR chain.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely, as long as there's value in it, then I think a lot of people are game for it. I suppose there's a line somewhere, isn't there, though, with a voice user interface. You can't always kind of be completely transparent as such because you can't say this call's being recorded and we're going to listen to your tone in case we detect that you're motivated to purchase or you're going to cancel. Plus, we're going to listen to your sentiment to know when to escalate you to an agent, and we're also going to record these calls and send anything that we don't understand to agents. It just gets very difficult to kind of to do it all. So
Oh
it'd
yeah,
be
yeah,
interesting to
yeah.
see how it goes, because it's, the where it is now is fantastic. It's from what you've explained, having technology that is able to literally pick up on signals that humans can't, and that's the whole point of AI, is for it to be able to do things better than humans can, to be able to make all of our lives better. And I think by the sounds of things, you're proving that to be the case. And as long as everyone kind of, as you've been saying this whole time, acts transparently and acts ethically and builds technology in the right kind of way, then this thing in future, God knows where it could go. It could be fantastic. So I wish you absolutely all the best, and thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it very much, Ken. Yeah, we see a very bright future for all of this, of course. Like any technology needs to be shaped by the right people and done in the right things. But I think tone, luckily, is inherently like, if you could say it, it's a good thing, right? Like we don't want
Mm,
to be misunderstood. We just like language want you to understand my English. We want my tone to be understood too. So very important. And yeah, very very happy you took the time to chat with me. It's awesome being on this.
perfect. Cheers, Sean. Appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget, join me next Thursday when we speak to TalkDesk around conversational commerce in the exclusive VUX webinar next Thursday, December the 8th. VUX.la/commerce to sign up, or you can go to VUX.world and hit the events tab. Until the next one,